Welcome, Math, to Survival of the Kindest. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little about your background?
Well, thanks very much for having me. So I'm Math Potts. Math is a silly name. It's two Fs. It's because when I was a little boy, I couldn't say th. So Matthew became Mafu, which is obviously embarrassing to admit now. I grew up in Carlisle and I've worked, for the largest portion of my career, kind of with people who have fairly tough lives. And I've now sort of expanded that to mean all of us, really, because the Camarados movement, which is what I work with on now, is about anybody going through tough times.
And so tell us about your family life. You know, have you got brothers and sisters? What was it like when you grew up in Carlisle? And how was all of that?
Oh, well, I was born at a very early age. And in Carlisle, yes. And yes, I have brothers and sisters, but I was an accident. So they're much older than me, and so I was the baby of the family. But it did mean that I got to spend a lot more time with my dad because he used to do lots of traveling when the kids were young, but then he kind of used to work a lot more at home, and that's probably the biggest thing for my youth, really, with my relationship with my dad. I think he is a towering influence over my life. And my mum, of course, was amazing too, but she was a very, very down to earth, working class Carlisle girl who kind of was the sun around which we all revolved, but didn't say much. Whereas my dad was a completely wild, eccentric type chap, and so I felt for my mum because after my brothers and sisters left home, there was just she was left with just me and dad, which must have been a nightmare for her. So I was effectively an only child for most of my teens. But these very cool brothers and sisters would pop in from time to time from exotic places around the world where they were working. But no, it was just mum, dad, and me. And then actually a fairly other big defining moment was I lost mum and dad in 3 years when mum died just before my 18th birthday and dad just before my 21st. Nothing remarkable about it. Breast cancer and heart disease, the two big killers for men and women. But that was obviously, quite a big thing and altered the course of my life, I guess.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and that's tough to lose both parents at a relatively young age. And I can imagine that was life-altering. How did that affect you?
Well, I think at 17 I was an unspeakably cocky, pretentious idiot who felt invincible, and then I wasn't. I thought I had the world at my feet at 17. I was, at school, I was in the debating society. I was the chairman of the debating society. I was the chairman of the charity committee. I was doing everything, and I was going to be big news. And obviously, when losing mum and then during my A levels and then losing dad during my finals at uni, that was just, robs you of your confidence. To be entirely honest, it robbed me of my. I didn't really see the point of cracking on. They were the two biggest relationships in my life, and they could be snuffed out so easily. I think it's fair to say I became fairly nihilistic at 21. Didn't really see the point of things. But that's when my first Christmas without them, I went and spent in the homeless shelters in London. And I remember going there thinking what an amazing guy I was for giving up my Christmas. And it was going to make me look so good in front of all my friends and everything. I'd lost my parents. Now I'm going to work in a homeless shelter. I mean, just make me a saint. Just get on with it. And then, of course, what happened was I went to the shelters and discovered that these people who had absolutely bugger all, who had nothing, they got me through Christmas. And it was their companionship over a cup of tea in a polystyrene cup in a drafty warehouse that that got me through Christmas. And that was absolutely the seed of everything for me, where I suddenly realized, hold on a minute, this whole charity thing, we've got it completely upside down and back to front. It's much more about mutuality and getting each other through the shit than me being an amazing benefactor. And that was utterly transformative for me, changed my life.
So what next? What did you do next? I'm just curious before we start that. What did you study at college?
Oh, English, but that was, didn't take any thought from me. My school suggested I go and study English, and I went, all right then. I mean, I didn't really put much thought into it, and that I was a dreadful student for 3 years. I went, even more hilarious, I went to Oxford University, but I was probably the worst student in the whole of Oxford University for 3 years.
I think that's something to be proud of, to be fair.
What?
But being the worst student at Oxford.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was there when Jacob Rees-Mogg was there. I used to debate against him in the Oxford Union. And,
my God.
And he looked fairly old then, and he was 18. But
wow.
That's just puts it in sets it in some time for you. Yeah, I was there with him.
Yes. Well, we best move swiftly on.
My claim to fame about Jacob Rees-Mogg actually is that I made a speech in the Oxford Union comparing him to Postman Pat because he looks actually remarkably like Postman Pat. And I said early in the morning, just when day is dawning, the honourable member is a very happy man. And the whole debating chamber burst into laughter. And they put there was a cartoon on the student magazine of the week of Jacob Rees-Mogg driving the little red van. And I was quite chuffed at that.
And has he been taking it out on the world since then because of that cutting insult?
Yeah. Cutting. It's all my fault, pal.
Excellent. Right. So, what did you do? So, you have you spend this Christmas in the shelter, and what happens next to you?
Oh well, I spent the next 14 Christmases doing the same thing, most of which were as a volunteer. But in my sort of in my normal life, I had this dream when I was a young man of being a filmmaker. So I spent about 8 years making films. Very low budget and no budget, dreadful films, which I thought were genius, of course. And I hit a golden goose for a while, and I used to make commercials for the perfume industry. So I would make intensely shallow commercials for Hugo Boss and Helmut Lang and Laura Biagiotti and things like this. And that paid very well, actually. So that was good. But when I wasn't doing my filmmaking or my commercials making, I was volunteering in the homeless shelters, so it was quite a stark contrast. So that was most of my 20s. But then I lost everything. I lost my marbles at the same time as I lost my business, both at the same time. And the upshot of that was just at the sort of nadir of things, Crisis, who I had volunteered for most of my 20s, suddenly turned around and offered me a job. So I kept from them the fact that I was a rampantly self-harming, nervous breakdown patient, and I just lied in the interview and got the job and ended up running the biggest homeless event in Western Europe, which was quite a turnaround, quite a change.
So this is your kind of mental health crisis. Is that something you want to talk about more, or should we just move swiftly on with it?
Oh, mate, no, I'm very open. I think it's important to be open about this stuff. You don't want to brush that under the carpet. No, I was raving bonkers at the end of my 20s, yeah.
Did you come to understand where all that came from and how it happened?
Well, I describe it as a piece of elastic snapped between the person I was putting out to the world and the person I actually was when I closed the door at night. So I was Mr. Gregarious, outgoing filmmaker, jazz musician. Because all through my whole life, I've always played the piano.
Girl from Ipanema.
There you go. I did that because I used to play on cruise ships for many years, and I would play weddings and bar mitzvahs. I'm available for your daughter's wedding, so just drop me a
That,
line. Anyone who's listening to this.
she will be listening, and I'm sure you'll be first on the list.
Not after that performance. So I was this sort of fairly outgoing fella, but it wasn't really what was going on, which I'm sure a lot of people listening to this can relate to. And I think the elastic just snapped eventually at the end of my 20s. I didn't cope well after mum and dad. Now, I think I did what most English people do, which I thought the most sensible thing to do with my grief is to bury it under lots of sort of repressed English behavior. And so I just did that. And then I think it just all exploded and bit me on the arse. And then that was that.
So I wrote a book about what we did in Frome along with a friend, Lindsay Clark. And he brought into this the notion of kaironos, which is a kind of Greek thing, which is I'm getting a slight echo. I don't know if you've got headphones.
Oh, I can go and get headphones. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to pause?
I'll just wait for you. That's fine.
All right.
Yeah.
I've got posh ones upstairs.
That's fine. It's only, I think we're getting the reverb, the echo back into the microphone. That's all.
Hold on a sec.
Your microphone's that good.
If that's not better, I can go and get my ones like yours.
No, that's fine. That works really well. It's only we were getting the echo back into the microphone. That was all.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Anyway, so kaironos, and it's a moment where we've not been paying attention to what goes on inside us, and we ignore it until our subconscious goes, "I tell you what, you're not doing anything until you sort this out." And it sounds like it might have been a bit of you're putting this stuff out there saying I'm fine when you're really dealing with a massive unresolved grief, which is, the death of both parents close together at a young age. It's a bloody big one.
Well, it's you'd be amazed how many people actually lose their parents at quite an early age. That was brought to my attention recently by someone who it's because I think heart disease and breast cancer kill people between 45 and 55. It's quite a lot. It's the sort of shooting gallery. Then I think it does happen. I don't think I'm particularly extraordinary, but yes, I did certainly. I certainly didn't particularly deal with it.
Yeah.
And then it just blew up, and and I was a bit of a mess.
So tell us about Crisis at Christmas and what you were doing, and
well, I mean, I guess I've got the zeal of the evangelist because it changed my life. So essentially, the only thing that gave meaning and purpose and straightened me out was to suddenly have this immense kind of purpose of spending time with people who had an out and were going through much worse than me, and yet were willing to give me their time and look out for me. And that was a real life changer. So I had always volunteered throughout my 20s, and then when this happened, I ended up working for Crisis, and it was a completely crazy job. I mean, there's absolutely no way, if you did a risk assessment for it, anyone would do Crisis Open Christmas now, because you basically take some of the most challenging, vulnerable, whatever label you want to give them, people in society. You put them in the care of 4,000 to 6,000 completely untrained volunteers who work 24-hour shifts in, back then it was makeshift shelters that we find about 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas and then somehow fashion into some form of accommodation. So untrained staff, inappropriate accommodation, most vulnerable people. It's a bonkers event, and it had been going for 30 years, and it was something that happened as a result of the Kathy Come Home homeless crisis back in the 70s, when the world Britain suddenly realized it had a homelessness problem. Crisis was one of the people to come out of that. So these shelters have been going for years and years. And when I took over, it was still pretty old style soup and blanket stuff. Fantastic volunteers, but really quite old school. And I was trying to turn that around and make the places full of a bit more dignity and respect, and engage people and move them on and give them interesting things to do, and see them as human beings. And I think we managed to succeed in that. And the third year of doing it, hilariously, I blagged the Millennium Dome and turned that into a homeless shelter for Christmas, which is my pub story, basically.
You're going to have to tell us more if it's a pub story.
Oh, just that 3 weeks out, start of December, we didn't have a main shelter. And our main shelter had to be at least 100,000 square foot. Now, you try and find a 100,000 square foot warehouse for Nout in London 3 weeks before Christmas, please. So we managed to somehow do it every year. But we used to use bus garages in Bermondsey, but they weren't available. So someone in the office said, we should have the dome. And we all laughed. And then I thought, well, nothing ventured. So I finally found the fella who was in charge of the dome. And hilariously, his name was Mr. Luck. I kid you. I kid you not. Ralph Luck, his name was. And I remember vividly sitting down having the phone call and him saying to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Potts, but we're actually disconnecting the whole of the Millennium Dome, the gas, the water, the electricity, all the utilities, because it's about to be taken over, but it's moving out of public ownership and into the hands of this conglomerate that we're going to turn it into the O2 with casinos and cinemas and music venue." And I said, don't worry, we bring all that. Completely lying, of course. And he said, "What do you mean you bring all that?" I said, all the gas, water, and electricity. We'll bring all that. We've been doing it for 30 years, Mr. Luck. And I think he could obviously sense what an idiot he had on the phone. But I just assume he thought he sort of admired my chutzpah or something, because he said, "Come on, then have a look at it." So I went down and have a look at it, and it's the biggest single-span building in the world. It's 3 billion cubic liters of air. I mean, it's the biggest thing you've ever seen. I remember turning up and standing there in the middle of it. I mean, you can lie Nelson's column down several times, inside it. And I remember the guy who worked for Mr. Luck met me, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "This is a 700 million pound building. The insurance indemnity for 1 week is 70 grand." And I just, without thinking, I just said, "Well, you're going to have to pay that then, because I had because I don't have it." He was completely gobsmacked, and we still had an hour of a tour to go, so he just gave me the tour. I think he thought, this is pointless. Anyway, John Prescott, I won't have a bad word to say about John Prescott, because he was the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, and it went into his red box over the weekend, and it came out, and he said yes. And I think Preza wanted the dome to be used for something that was useful before it left public ownership. That's my view anyway. So he gave it to us. The only problem was that you had to heat it, and it cost 10 grand a day to heat it.
Wow.
And so I phoned up EDF Energy and I said, "Listen, it's going to cost me 90 grand. The government's going to give me 50. Will you give me 40? And after a few hours, they came back and said, "Yeah, we will." So I phoned the government and I said, "Listen, it's going to cost me 90 grand. EDF's giving me 40. Will you give me 50? And they said yes. And so I pulled a number on both of them, and I got the heating paid. Anyway, the story goes on, but when we've got more time and a pint in our hands, I'll tell you the rest.
Yeah, brilliant. And my guess is it must have been a fantastic event.
Oh, yeah, it was an absolute smasher. It was massive. The very first fella who walked in the door, I'll never forget, he just looked around and he said, "Is this for me?" And it just couldn't, people couldn't believe that we'd do something like that. And it was just, the aspiration and the warmth was lovely. And I remember, Howard's Food Hall gave us everything on Christmas Eve that they had. We had lobster and caviar. We had everything. I tried to get the Coldstream Guards to come from Buckingham Palace, and they agreed. But then the Metropolitan Police were going to send 50 officers because it was a terrorist threat. So I had to cancel that, because I didn't want 50 coppers turning up. I don't think our homeless fellas would have really liked that. So it was an amazing event. It was incredible. And after that, the government were so grateful that I hadn't embarrassed them because, of course, I could have made a huge PR stink about it, using the dome for homelessness, but I didn't. And they were very grateful. So they offered me a job.
No.
And yeah. So they offered me a job and I went and worked for the government for 4 years after that, advising them on homelessness.
Wow. Was that any good?
Well, they gave me 90 million quid to build a new kind of culture of homeless centres. Well, it was actually just meant to basically rebuild homeless hostels because Tony Blair was very successful at getting people off the street. He reduced rough sleeping by 2/3. People forget that. But then they just went into these god-awful places with long corridors stinking of piss. And so I then spent the next 4 years trying to overhaul them. And it was a very surreal thing working for the government because I sort of accidentally ended up writing the government's policy on homeless centres, mainly because no one else could be bothered. And so they just let me get on with it. There was precious little oversight on how I spent the money. But we managed to get great things done in that time. And we blagged a further 80 million for another program as well. And I think we really did change the culture in homelessness at that time. It became known as the Places of Change program, it's a surreal thing. It was a phrase I used, and then suddenly the minister's using it, and it's suddenly embossed on buildings around the country. It's very strange. Working in Whitehall is very strange. You say something and it becomes policy. It's very weird. So I had a little bit of an impact there.
What did you do? What did you change that made a difference?
It was mainly about stopping seeing these places as, I guess, what the housing association world would call units, bedrooms. And it wasn't really about the bedrooms. It was about, is the space a place of change? Is it a place of activity and relationships where people... This was, part of my awakening to the idea that we only need two things in life, really, which are purpose and relationships, and everything else is for the birds. And so we just didn't really have that conversation in these places. It was about accommodation and sorting your benefits out. So I tried to make these places have kind of social enterprises in them, to have activities in them, have football pitches, have car mechanics garages, would you believe, have kitchens, activity places where people could meet each other and do stuff. And that's what we tried to do.
So I'm very curious about this because I can construct a narrative in my head which goes something along the lines of a journey perhaps that we all make to a greater or lesser degree. And it goes something like this: that you grow up and you think you're going to conquer the world, or whatever it is. You're young, you're man, you're full of energy, and like the world's at your feet. But then you've got this stuff going on behind, which is just catching up on you as you're riding the waves of your ego, and then bang, and then you find that actually the real meaning and the real purpose really comes from relationships and doing things that give you a sense of purpose in life. So that's where the wealth lies. And then you go into government, and I can't say I get any sense whatsoever that government have an understanding of purpose and relationships. They're like the people that perhaps you were aiming for, who have become masters of the universe. They become successful at everything. They get into power. They become mad egotists, and I'd love to know your reflection of talking about, you feel in your heart the value of meaning and purpose, and you're doing that in the context of government where it doesn't feel like that's heard terribly well.
No, but then it's not just government, it's the whole shebang, it's the whole setup. Government, local government, charities, organizations, the whole thing is set up on a sort of false premise, which is that counting things matters. So it's all about if you can't count it, it doesn't matter. It's I think the whole and then you've got the whole hierarchical top-down approach of getting things done, which is kind of the government's raison d'etre, and so that the whole thing is kind of what the impact they're pursuing is a false premise, and their way of pursuing it, the vehicle which they use, is inept. So that I just wouldn't really know where to start, really. Of course, it doesn't work. It's not just the people in it; it's the setup as well, and that's not just government. It's kind of I hate to sound terribly nihilistic, but it's most folk, because the whole thing is based on this sort of false hierarchical principle of that's how you get things done, and it doesn't work. So basically, it all comes down to what's in the minister's brief. And what you brief the minister on is numbers and impact, and that doesn't tell a story of meaning and purpose. And if he were to or she were to stand up in the House of Commons and say that stuff, presumably they think they would be laughed at, so they never do, and so we never have the conversation, so we never pursue it, so we never create programs about it. What we did was kind of in spite of all that, we just got away with it, and no one really asked questions because they were far too interested in something else. So I just basically, wrote the government's policy and no one challenged me. So I just got away with it for a while. That was it.
That's brilliant. I can imagine that there's a certain amount of fun in that, as well as a certain amount of madness where you're looking at the system going, what have I come into here?
Oh, yeah, no, completely. But I'll tell you, there's one secret weapon we have. And the secret weapon is the way they do things doesn't work. So that's our great secret weapon. So what I was able to do in those years was just able to stand up and say, so is what you're doing working? Because no one's moved on from this hostel in 2 years, because homelessness is at these levels. So you know what? Why don't you believe me? And just on the basis of trying something else. And so that was pretty much my default position, which was that, what you're doing it doesn't work. So let's do what works, and getting people some friends and a sense of purpose. Guess what? They don't come back, which means it doesn't cost you any more money to accommodate them. So let's do that thing that saves you money, and that works. And ultimately that's, but that lasts for a while until the next administration comes in. The biggest fault of government actually isn't just the egomania or the vanity of the people. It's not even the bureaucracy. It's the fact that it changes every 4 years. And so, and in fact, ministerial appointments change more regularly than that. And there's one crazy rule I was told in the civil service, which is you never tell a minister what the last person did. They have to make the mistakes themselves, which is utterly crazy. I mean, I remember being marched into a room and told that. So therefore, people just come in and they change stuff constantly, even stuff that works. So, this was my big disillusionment, was everything I've done has always been overturned by the next person. And that's actually not just government, that's charities too. So that's why I just want to get the hell away from organizational change, because I think it's deeply limiting, and go for movement change and change long-term community grassroots change, because that stuff can last for 100 years. But anything I did in government just lasted for a couple.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that says it really nicely, and it's a massive problem. These top-down systems, there's one principle which I think really helps explain it, and it's a principle of subsidiarity, and that's a principle by which the further the people who make the decisions are from the people who experience those decisions, the bigger the disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right, I think. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I guess the other thing is I'm a big believer also in naming and shaming.
Okay.
So I would more than happily go to conferences and then just put up a massive picture of an underground night shelter with 20 guys living in darkness in a room with dogs, which is what we still had back then. And I'd just point to the guy in the audience and say, "This is yours." And then, it didn't make me popular, but it shamed people into doing stuff. I mean, there's so much shameful practice in the charity world, and so much unbelievably deconstructing of people's life chances that you kind of, in the end, it matters so much that you just have to say, why are you doing that? And then after a while, and I know, and it's, it's easy for me to say it's not easy for everyone to do, but ultimately, you just hope people are embarrassed into change, Julian.
It's really sad, isn't it, that we get to that state, and
yeah,
it's a terrible dilemma, and it's a dilemma of communities versus top down, and where people's jobs become more important than the thing that they're doing, and
yeah.
Anyway, comes back to the two most important things in life are relationships and purpose. And if you get that right, then you're more likely to create less of a disaster.
Amen.
Yeah. So what next? What happened for 4 years?
Oh, well, yeah. Then I wanted to get back in the trenches because I used to fund these people to build these cracking new hostels. And then I would go home to Whitehall and they would have all the fun. And I was very jealous of that. And I to be brutally honest with you, I missed the people. I mean, I got into homeless because I had, I felt a kindred spirit with pissed Glaswegian men, basically, who are homeless. There's just no better company, frankly. So I was spending all my time in Whitehall talking to wankers. So I wanted to.
Why don't you say it like it is, Matt?
Oh, okay. Sorry, you can bleep that out.
No, certainly not.
So I just wanted to go and be with people who I like being with. So I went back into the trenches with, I ran the biggest homeless provider in the country at the time, which was the Salvation Army's homelessness. And they were looking for the first time ever to bring someone external in, instead of someone in a uniform called Major, whatever, to run their homeless service. And so I was catapulted in to the Salvation Army and ran that for a few years. And they had every conceivable kind of provision known to man for people having a tough time, from Inverness to Penzance and all across Ireland. And it all came under me for a while, which was quite scary. We had about 1,000 staff and lots of projects, and more than that, actually. And that was something else. I mean, two organizations you might want to think twice about working for: a church and an army. Put both together, and you've got the Sally Army. So a mix of the most absolutely committed, beautiful people, but in a nightmarish bureaucracy where, quite honestly, you could be in a meeting and someone says, the reason we're going with this internet provider is because the Holy Spirit told us to.
Wow.
And so it's quite a tough one, really. And people challenge me, what's the point of turning people's lives around if they don't go to Christ, which was really challenging. But then also some people working on the front line with an extraordinary commitment, which inspired me. And you get that in faith communities. So you get both. You get people who they really are there for a higher purpose, and it's deeply inspiring. But then you also get people who I'm not sure how Christian they're behaving. So the canteen would go quiet when I walked in, and it was a big canteen. Meetings would hush, and I was not massively popular with the changes I was trying to bring. But the funny thing is, I was actually the biggest fan of William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, because if you really go back to his book In Darkest England and the Way Out, which was the sort of manifesto, really, on which he built his social work. It's fantastic stuff. And it's not about handouts at all. It's not about soup kitchens. It's about giving people dignity and purpose and self-esteem, and rolling up your sleeves and going into the slums and actually, taking your faith and putting it into action. So I would try and, preach that. And that got me some of the way, but in the end, I was just too much of a nuisance. And in the end, I was the level of resistance against me. I was coming home and my kids didn't know who I was, and I was kicking the cat. And my marriage was in trouble. Actually, I moved out for 2 weeks and slept in my spare room of my friend's house, not because I was having an affair, but because the work was eating me up. There were so many people against me, so it made me into a not very nice person. So I had to move out. So that was a real moment for me and my wife where I thought, I'm never, ever going to let it get as bad as this ever again. And I've been through some really tough times since, but we've never been in trouble like that because I just thought, no, family first.
So what did you do? I mean, I've got to say I sympathise with that, because there are moments in the NHS where I think I felt the same, where you've got organisational culture is causing a massive amount of suffering and nobody is owning up to it. Which is a really tough place to work. And then you feel like the outsider. You feel like the madman on the outside, waving your arms, going, "You're heading over a cliff, and if you carry on, this is all going to collapse."
Yeah.
And they go, "No, everything's fine." And guess what?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. It's I think I made a massive mistake. This is a really weird podcast. This is MAF the Life Story. Who the hell? Who's going to want to listen to this?
I want to listen, and that's all that counts.
Well, you may be the only listener, but that's fine by me. I made a massive error for 20 years, and I just would love anyone listening not to make the same mistake as me, which is possibly a product of my Catholic upbringing. But I thought that what you have to do is go where the bad energy is. That's what you're supposed to do. You go where the bad energy is and you turn it around. You turn the super tank around. I mean, it's such terrible macho ego shit, isn't it? I think. But, I'm going to turn the bad energy around. And so I went to sort of the places that were, these terrible shelters, or, the heart of government, or, an old Victorian charity. And I'm going to turn it around. And actually, what happens is it burns you up. And the level of change you make is perhaps 1%. And guess what? The next person comes and undoes that anyway. So the answer is go where the good energy is, go where the good people are. And guess what? Change happens exponentially. And so that's what I finally woke up to after 20 years. After the Salvation Army, I became chief exec of a big national charity, and then turned it around, won lots of awards, was doing really well, and then discovered my predecessor had left me with a £17 million pension liability. It completely crucified us. And so I was suddenly a chief exec of a big charity that went under. We were page 2 on The Guardian. We would have made page 1 if it hadn't been for Jimmy Savile. The only time I will be grateful for Jimmy Savile.
Wow.
So we went under, and that was deeply, deeply harrowing. I've still got PTSD about it. And I think, so I wouldn't say I came to this revelation really in an inspiring or brave manner. I came in desperation, because in the end, the sector spat me out. And 6 weeks before Christmas, I didn't have a job. I had nothing but statutory redundancy, couldn't pay the mortgage. And I was out of my ear. And I limped along for a couple of years doing consultancy work. But in the end, whilst applying for jobs, but I was unemployable at this point because I was quite a bitter man. And I came second for very big CEO jobs 7 times.
Oh.
And the reason is because in the final interview, I would just say, "Oh, for fuck's sake, this is what you have to do." Funnily enough, people were like, "Yeah, I'm not sure we really want to work with this guy." Because I just had enough of that charity dynamic, and I just didn't want to be part of it. So I kiboshed it. Anyway, so I'm sat in my bedroom looking out the window and started this thing called Camerados.
Tell us more.
Well, I didn't get very far for 6 months because I'm the only fella who tries to start a social movement about friends and purpose without anyone else, just on my own.
You're looking for friends and purpose.
Well, I'm on my own in my bedroom, and I think that's going to work. So what an idiot. So things didn't really start to happen until I went for a cup of tea with an old friend of mine called Jenny Fox, who was an amazing social entrepreneur. And I said, "Come on, give us a hand." And we went and worked with 10 crack addicts in Blackpool, and completely made up a program on the spot about how to get them friends and purpose. And we got them to start a business in 4 weeks because we thought that would bring them together. And the business they started was they all dressed as Christmas elves outside Debenhams and wrapped people's Christmas presents, which was great because people were handing them all their posh Christmas goods. And these fairly active crack addicts were laughing their heads off because normally they would go and sell it for a score, but instead they were wrapping it. I mean, we had a huge laugh, and it definitely brought us friends and purpose. I mean, we were appalling at wrapping presents. We had forgotten that was a fatal flaw in our business plan. But we used to have a phrase: "Just put a fucking bow on it." Anyway, but we worked with people, and we tried that idea for a while. It didn't have legs. We tried it in a few different cities with people with big tough challenges, but it didn't really have legs because it was too dependent on me and Jenny, and we wanted something that was sustainable without us. And so we tried this other idea, which was something I'd had for a while, which I used to call "What if Samaritans ran Starbucks?" And it was this idea of, what if you went somewhere in the high street that gave a damn, but wasn't a service and wasn't selling you anything? And that became the public living room idea. And that has been pretty much the backbone of Camarados' work for about 5 or 6 years now.
So tell us more about Camarados.
Well, that's a big open question, Julian. Yeah. I feel like I'm doing all the work here.
Well, funnily enough.
Nice. Yeah, well, I mean, you've heard how I struggled for 20 years to get people to realize that friends and purpose was the answer. It became really obvious to me in the shelters after Mum and Dad died when I went there that that's what was going on. And nothing disabused me of that fact the more I worked. And when I went to the government, I saw that all the great homeless charities out there doing really great work, which I have to say are normally the small ones, were all about relationships with people they were working with. It was always that. And purpose, great business ideas or something that excited homeless people instead of a shelf-stacking job in Asda, which doesn't give you purpose or friends. So I saw that, and then in the Sally Army, I reconfigured their entire services based on purpose and relationships, and that went pretty well. And so as I was going through these institutions, I was always trying to bring those two things. And so Camarados was about doing it outside of the system and outside of an institution, which I'd never been brave enough to do. But what does that look like? How do you get people friends? How do you get them a purpose? And then, of course, I realized you get both in one big caffeine hit when you look out for someone else. When you look out for someone and they look out for you, you get connection and an immense sense of purpose. There's no bigger sense of purpose than looking out for someone else. So that was why we thought creating spaces where people could do this. I have to say, it also came from a question, Julian, that I asked people. I said, where do you go in a crisis? And it was really fascinating. I only ever got two answers. People said they go to the GP or they go to Costa. And of course, the GP has only got 10 minutes. And when I spoke to GPs, they would say that in the 9th minute, the person tells them that it's not their knee or their back. It's the fact that their life's shit and they're lonely. And the GP has 1 minute to sort that out. And then Costa, of course, well, you can get a very nice, expensive blueberry muffin, but you can't really get much else. So I thought, well, maybe there's something else here. And marrying that with the friends and purpose notion, came up with public living rooms. And we took over a garage in Sheffield in January, about 5 years ago. And it used to belong to an undertaker, and it was where he parked his hearses. And we got it for free. And the mortuary was our kitchen, where he used to keep the bodies. And it couldn't have been more inhospitable. And so that required us, therefore, to really work hard to make it welcoming. And Jenny, thankfully, is amazing at that. And we basically went on free cycle because we didn't have any money at the time. And if you've got a van, you can get anything for free because people don't want to get rid of their sofa or their piano because it's too much hassle. But if you'll pick it up, they'll give it to you for now. So we ended up with 7 sofas and 7 pianos.
Oh, brilliant.
And we decked this place out and we had fairy lights. We put a blackboard outside which said top 5 David Bowie songs, come in and argue. And we had people walking past coming in going, Gene Genie is no way nearly better than heroes. And we had people from building sites, we had homeless people, we had students, we had tourists. And I'd just never seen this before, this level of mixing and humanity. And that's when we knew we were onto something. And of course, now they're all around the UK and around the world.
So I've got more questions there, but I want to know why Genie isn't better than Heroes.
Well, don't ask me. It was someone else who said that. I mean, I like both of them, frankly.
So how did you? I mean, it's a terrific idea, and I guess for me, if there's a symbol around compassionate communities or community development, it's tea and cake. It's really simple because everything happens around tea and cake. You know,
That's right.
it's where when you have, if you share tea and cake, you are creating a place where people are welcome, where you're not excluding people. And, you know, on a physiological level, we calm down, and we're there to chat and have a nice time. And so it's a kind of ideal setting for building relationships and purpose, tea and cake.
Absolutely.
So the first thing is, how on earth did you manage to fund it?
Oh, well, in the beginning, we were working other jobs and doing it we were able to get a bit of work for half the week, and the other half of the week, me and Jen would jump in a car and go somewhere, and that was the way it was for quite a while. And then I guess I'll be honest, when you spend 20 years getting scars on your back, some people are watching. And I guess the people who saw me trying to make change and failing for 20 years, then were quite relieved that I was out of it and trying something else. And they stepped up to back me. And one of them was Julian Corner, who runs a foundation called Lankelly Chase Foundation. And he'd known me for years and kind of been shaking his head at all the things I was doing but being very supportive and encouraging. And so he gave us a little bit of seed money, which meant I could spend a bit more time on it. And then Lankelly Chase gave us a little bit more. And then we sort of grew it from there, and we got other grant funders on board. And we're still grant funded now by about 4 different funders, but we've got a plan over 5 years to try and make ourselves a bit more self-sustainable and create a cross-subsidy model. But one of the ways we are going to survive is by being very small. We've definitely learned the lesson, and I've learned the lesson over the years, that to make real change, you've got to stay small. So we've got a very small team in a shed in Oxfordshire.
So that's a really curious insight, and one of the I feel one of the holes that charities fall down repeatedly is that they want to become bigger, and when they want to become bigger, they're more dependent on charitable funding, and then what happens is that their reason for being is dependent on their ability to raise funds. And that's not community development. And that means that, again, you're doing to rather than doing with or by. And I guess, or even from, you know, which is from the ground up.
Yeah.
And I guess that what you're saying is you're there to enable community rather than to enable the charity.
When I was a CEO of a national charity, my salary bill was 12 million a year. That's how much I needed to pay all my staff. Okay. So if you're a fairly decent human being, it's not surprising that your main focus day to day is to find that 12 million and put food on the table of your staff. You can tell yourself that's an honorable way to spend your time, is to preserve your staff. That, of course, isn't your job. Your job is actually the mission of the charity, which for that charity was about homelessness and domestic violence and offenders and community development. But our focus wasn't on that. Our focus was on the salary bill. And the trustees can very easily convince themselves that they are custodians of the charity, and therefore preservation of the charity and protecting the charity's reputation is their primary aim. And of course, it isn't. It's the mission again. But mission gets pushed further and further down the agenda. until it's rarely talked about, and all you talk about is the money and preservation. And that's why the charity model is broken, fundamentally broken, and that's why we're not a charity.
And I would also say that, you know, that if you're using principles of community development, that what you're doing is you're saying you are enabling communities and supporting communities to do this for themselves and not building dependency.
Yeah.
And that means that you're low cost because you haven't got to employ loads of people. You're saying, no, this is something you can do. We can help you a bit, but then goodbye. You're on your own with it. And we can be a meeting house where we can have a cup of tea and a piece of cake and lovely conversations. But the ideas that you generate will be how you take it forward.
Yeah. And not having money is freedom, mate. It's extraordinary freedom, and this is what a lot of people don't understand. I have an aspiration to earn less money year on year, and it's something my wife has not failed to notice I am achieving at the moment. Because you are less trapped by the need to sustain your lifestyle, and that goes for organizations too, and that goes for community development too. As I said to a guy from the National Lottery, a great person, I said to them, listen, if 3 people want to meet at that table in the corner of this cafe and look out for each other and be camarados, and it's costing them nothing and it's costing you nothing, why the hell do you need to get them to gather outcomes for you? It's not costing you anything. And my point is, you know, if it really is ultimately freedom. So look at Alcoholics Anonymous. That's an absolute hero model for me. Where you live, Julian, tonight there could be 10 meetings within 10 square miles. You don't know about them. They're happening. No one's getting paid. But at the end of the meeting, they might pass the cup round, put a few quid in, pays for the rent of the hall. Boom, you're done. What a beautiful model. No one can stop you from doing it. And I think there's extraordinary currency in people willing to give their time for each other, because they're also not constrained by having any hands on them, any power tainting the model or tainting them because they've got to deliver X, Y, Z for the funder. So what we're trying to do is unlock people to do that. We're funded and we've got to deal with that. But the people in the communities, they're not. They can just crack on and get on with it.
I when you were talking earlier, I thought it reminded me a lot of the model of park runs. And the guy who started it was saying, you know, his life was pants. He lost his wife, he lost his job. He wanted to go running with some mates, but he didn't want to have some fascist beating him to tell him to run faster.
Yes.
And he wanted to sit down afterwards and have a cup of coffee. Yeah. And so he did all of that. And now there are 20 million people every Saturday morning who run for fun, you know. It's
a beautiful model. And it's another one of those hero models. Just absolutely brilliant. Make something simple, give it away, get out the way, let people do it. Boom.
Exactly.
Open source it.
Exactly. Okay, so now you're going to have to tell us about the principles of Camarados.
Oh, am I? Right, okay. Well, these were, I mean, I have to just tell you something here that I'm not, you're Dr. Julian Abel, I'm not Dr. Math Potts, right? Okay, so I don't really know anything. All I've ever done is follow my nose on what I think is working and do more of that. And so Camarados similarly isn't based on some doctrine or policy work. It's what we do is we never write a business plan. We just do something on Monday, make an arse of it on try and have another go on Tuesday, make an arse of it again, do it again on Wednesday. And so the principles came out of that is that we made a massive arse of it. And suddenly there were these people exhibiting extraordinary power dynamics in the spaces and creating cliques and being elitist, and people bring their own baggage. People are very weird, and they turn up into these spaces where we're inviting them to be mutual, and they're behaving like little Hitlers. So you suddenly have to go, hold on a minute, are you telling me that before you can do this, you've got to unlearn all that shit? And you do. We bring so much baggage to it. So the hierarchical system that's hunting for outcomes that we were talking about earlier, it's had the run of the place for a century and a half. So therefore, we're all indoctrinated with the same stuff. So the most common 2 questions in a public living room are who's in charge and what are the rules? I mean, how more messed up can you be, right? You can't just have a cup of tea. So we realized we needed principles to act as a form of de-lime scaling the kettle and taking these people and reminding them to be more human. And be more human is our big tagline, really. And so 6 ways to be more human. I'll rattle through them for you. Quite a confounding one is no fixing. So there's no fixing in a Camerado's space. The immense urge to fix someone's problems when they're having a tough time must be resisted at all costs. Just in this space, we're not saying that fixing is bad. Fixing in hospitals, fixing at your counsellor or whatever. Whatever people are doing, great. Just not in here. So let's not be in anyone's face in here, because it's amazing what thoughts and ideas you can have when liberated from the need to find an answer and an outcome. So that's number one. Number two is probably the most popular, which is it's okay to be a bit rubbish. We've got our most popular bit of merchandise is a badge which says "I'm a bit shit sometimes," and people absolutely love this badge. And the reason is when you see someone wearing a badge that says "I'm a bit shit sometimes," your instant reaction is to laugh and say, "Yeah, me too, pal." And so this is a place to be rubbish, because my God, everywhere else in your life you've got to be a success, don't you? You've got to be winning everywhere, winning as a dad, winning as a husband, winning at work, winning at life, and so you don't have to be winning here. So it's a place to be rubbish. It's a place where you can disagree respectfully. That's particularly confounding these days. The state of public discourse is such that if you disagree with someone, it's the same as not liking them. I don't know when that happened, but not in a Camerado space. We have fun. A very big part of it is being silly. We're extremely serious about being silly. So you may have seen our street activism at the moment, where we're going around cities wearing giant underpants. Talking to people about when life is pants, and then I think the one I've missed is what I call the counterintuitive principle, which was the one I found in the shelters all those years ago, and that is, if you see somebody struggling, don't help them. If you see someone struggling, ask them to help you, and it is magic fairy dust. It has never let me down. It is an extraordinary counterintuitive thing. But I've many times been sat with someone who wants to end their own life, and it is utterly shocking and desperate. But when I've said to them, "Look, I'm really sorry about that, but would you do me a favor?" and I ask them to help me with something, well, within 10 minutes, that suicidal person is telling me to calm down, that they're all over it, not to worry about it. And I'm not saying that their life is completely sorted, but what you convey by asking someone to do you a favor is you say that they are valued, that they belong, that you need them, that maybe you don't have all the answers. And all of that is conveyed simply by saying, "Listen, can you do me a favor?" Because this person feels they're worthless. So that's a big principle. So that's why mutuality is baked into Camerados. You don't come to Camerados to be helped. You come to Camerados to look out for each other. And that's a very, very important sentence, each other.
Yeah, and that sense of belonging for me lies at the heart of it. And it reminds me of this, on one of the podcasts we had Nahid Hassani, who works with homeless people in palliative care. And he was saying that that street family is really important. And, he recalled a story where there wasn't anyone else around, so they asked a guy who was down the hall to look after his friend because there was no one else to do it. And after the friend had died, this guy came back to him and said, that meant so much to me. Yeah. So I think that's a great principle. Wow, that sounds brilliant. And how's it going?
I've actually just realized that I'm going to get a huge ribbing from anyone in my team if they listen to this, because I've forgotten one principle, which is mixing with people who aren't like you.
Oh, yeah.
And that was something that we saw in the very first public living room, people who don't normally mixing, which is massive. Well, it's going really well. I mean, obviously the pandemic was a bit of a blow, because we're all about face-to-face, and overnight the government outlawed our entire mission. Ironically, we used to talk about reducing social distance. And then suddenly this phrase is used in a very different way. So yeah, 130 public living rooms were about to go live March 2020. Of course, well, many were live, but that would have been how many we had in total, and they all had to close overnight. So we went online for about 18 months. A camarado in Berlin got in touch and said that she ran her whole business online and could she help us? So we created these things called spoon rooms, which is a Zoom call when you bring a spoon, which is obviously quite silly. But also it works as a talking stick, and you wave it when you want to speak. And spoon rooms have been amazing, and there's been various spoon rooms in different languages now around the world, and my team have run 2 a week, and that's been great for people. And we've had Zoom house parties, and we've had all sorts, but it's not the same. But I'm very pleased to say that now that we're sort of in a different phase of the pandemic, there's about 50 plus public living rooms back open. So people really do have an appetite for it. I mean, just if you were to go to Twitter and look at what's going on under the hashtag Camarados or our Twitter profile, you'll see on every day there's someone in Devizes or someone in Barry in Wales or someone in north of Scotland, whatever, putting on some public living room, getting together, having a cup of tea, looking out for each other, and it's so wonderful to see.
Tell us about public living rooms.
Well, I sort of already have. I mean, I guess it's the public realm doesn't really have anything like it, I don't think. It tends to be divided into places that are selling you stuff and places that are fixing you, services and retail. So this is a place where you get neither. I suppose libraries, maybe bus stations, train stations are the closest you could get, but there's not many places you can just go and be. So we're trying to make sure every neighborhood has one. And if anyone listening to this fancies having a go, you get in touch with us. We send you a box called Public Living Room in a Box. So everything we've learned, all the mistakes we've made have all gone into this box. And you get this lovely box of goodies, all individually wrapped, and you open it and there's fairy lights and all sorts of things in there for you, and some tips and hints and principles. And you can have a go. And it just takes you and a few people who give a damn to get one going. Sometimes people do it in a local cafe, a local park, on a Wednesday between 7 and 9, wherever they like. There are others. There's a university that has one. Pre-pandemic, 700 students a day were using it. It was open every day. We have previously done it in hospitals pre-pandemic, 6 NHS hospitals. We had 130,000 people pass through the hospital public living rooms. And to our astonishment, over 50% of them were staff, not patients or families, but stressed out nurses and doctors who needed a lanyard-free space to be a human for 10 minutes. So that was really fascinating. So all environments, all places, all neighborhoods can have a public living room, and I would say need one. You just need a space alongside the system where you're not being fixed, and it's all right to be a bit shit.
Funnily enough, so I worked alongside Froome Medical Practice, and one of the people who started it was Jenny Hartnell, and who came from a community development background, and she was signposting people to groups and stuff. And many people said, I don't want to go to a group, I just want to meet people.
Yeah.
So she said, she went, well, why don't I start a talking cafe? And that's what happens down
Brilliant.
the Cheese and Grain on a Monday morning, and then other groups happen around it. There's a exercise group and the walking group, and Patrick from the Men's Shed comes down. It's a place to chat, and everything happens around that place to chat. It's I think that sounds absolutely terrific, and presumably there's an international component to this because people want to chat all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, one of our first public living rooms was in downtown Baltimore, with a centre that's particularly for Black youths and Black families, and it's amazing. There's people across Europe, like I said. There's one opened in the North Island of New Zealand the other day, which was wonderful to see. That's one thing that the pandemic has actually helped us with, because people can zoom in and talk to you very easily, and have suddenly realised that. So on Friday, I had the most amazing experience of talking to the public living room in Freetown in Sierra Leone. where on the beach in the Vibe Cafe, some people run a public living room every week. And talking to them was amazing. Just this idea that in the westernmost tip of Africa, people are talking about our principles is a huge buzz.
I think it's because this is our biology. Because as we know from the name of this podcast, survival of the kindest is the thing that counts. Survival of the fittest is some kind of British imperialist nightmare, which it's an excuse for the people who are already wealthy and have lots to have more. It's but actually we survive by cooperation, and because of that, it's built into our biology, and because of that, it means it's present in every single human being, which is why what you're doing works all over the world.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear people in Sierra Leone talk about how it's not okay to make mistakes in Sierra Leone.
Oh man, the thing about making mistakes is, if you applied that principle to growing up, we'd never learn to walk. Boom. Because we learn to walk by falling over.
Yeah, I know, and it's also it's a tremendous arrogance to think that life isn't going to have trouble in it. I mean, like who thinks you're going to have a life without a tough day? I mean, of course you are. So therefore, inherently, you've admitted that mistakes are going to happen. I mean, it's Marvin Gaye said it: 3 things in life, birth, death, and trouble. I mean, these are the things that are going to happen to you. So therefore, how do you handle the mistakes when they happen? And it's really fascinating that we were told very early on when we were working with those crack addicts that we were hugely irresponsible, because if their business failed, that we were working with them, they would relapse and their death would be on our hands. That's how it was put to me by a local charity. And I said, no, you see, what's going to happen is if the business fails, we're going to put the kettle on and piss ourselves about it, just laugh a lot about how shit it was. And we're going to bust out the biscuits and we're going to have another go tomorrow. And if it fails tomorrow, well, we're really going to laugh then. And we're going to normalize failure for these guys instead of catastrophizing failure and driving them to their own graves because we judge them for it.
The other aspect of that, the way that I phrase it is the risk aversion is much worse than the risk itself. And it's like you see it again and again in healthcare. One of the things that that is a personal trigger, I think, for me, is this business about palliative care services struggle to teach people manual handling. Because if you teach manual handling wrong, maybe somebody will hurt themselves and then they'll sue you, rather than thinking, actually, if we leave people to move their relatives in a way that's going to hurt the relative themselves, that's much better than not being sued. And it's like, you're kind of going, oh,
I know. Well,
what happened to you?
This is it. This is why when we systemize, we dehumanize.
Exactly.
And we create far greater risks. Like, don't get me started on safeguarding. I mean, safeguarding is a word that we now shout like the word fire, because that's the reaction it has on everyone. It's like if you shout fire in a crowded place, everyone goes screaming. If you shout safeguarding, all sense stops, everything shuts down, the barriers come down. We start talking to people with our head on one side, with a lot of forms, in windowless rooms. And everyone gets terrified, and the chance of actually people disclosing and being honest and opening up and dealing with it diminishes exponentially. So the way we deal with risk is really stupid.
Really stupid. We've nailed it.
There you go. There's a little golden nugget for your listeners.
That's it. So it's great to hear you talk about all of this, because there's a massive amount of commonality, in the way you're describing about things and the way that I feel about things, and I've found a whole load of allies who think in very similar ways, similar languages, and I'm really interested to know where have you found your allies? Where have you found the people who are on the same page?
Well, that's really interesting question. I mean, number one, the people who get it the most are the people who are going through the toughest times, because they're the people who are fairly fed up with the system getting in their face. And so they come to us with open arms. And that's brilliant because that's who we want. But I would also say that the community development world seem to get this so much more than other sectors, if you're going to talk like that, because I think they've understood the notions of mutuality and working together much better than other sectors. And, you know, a lot of my thinking too was massively influenced, as I think yours has been, by things like asset-based community development and those principles of meeting people where they are, you know, celebrating success and all those great things that our friend Cormac Russell and other people talk about is largely absent from the very top-down hierarchical approach to social justice, which I lived in for many years. And so that's imbued in. So when we talk about our values, it seems to speak to that audience. But we also have a lot of social workers really, really interested in what we're doing and desperate to do what they call real social work. So kind of in spite of the system, really. So Social Work England have had me as a speaker often. They're big fans, which is lovely. I guess, yeah, people inside the system who joined it for the right reasons and are hanging on, they get it too.
Have you had any contact with Indigenous communities? Because I've, you know, several places where I've spoken with people from Indigenous communities. You know, if you're talking about compassionate communities, well, they say, well, that's what we do anyway. And there's a sense of us having to reinvent what we do naturally to kind of unlearn the rubbish that we've accumulated over a couple of millennia. You know.
You are so completely, totally right. When you were talking earlier about survival of the fittest, I was thinking about what a nightmare that whole social Darwinism from the sort of late 1800s has kind of infected everything, and then couple it with Victorian approaches to charity and philanthropy, and then add it to government, and we've got this nightmare. When in actual fact, also in the 1800s, there was people like Kropotkin talking about mutuality and mutual associations, and they're wonderful social reformers like Octavia Hill, who she was creating what she called I think she called them outdoor sitting rooms. What, you know, 150 years before us, she was creating parks for people to come together in. There were enlightened people who realized that mutual associations were far stronger ties. I mean, in fact, if you look at the natural world works mutually much more than we think it does. We think it's survival of the fittest, but actually, if you watch birds on a bird table, they wait for each other to have a go at getting the seeds. Wolves work together. There is mutuality in the natural kingdom. I'm slightly out of my depth here, and I'm sure someone will phone in and say I'm wrong. But I do believe that it's such a shame that mutuality hasn't been the default setting, and instead it's been the hierarchical approach. But I can't remember where we were going with this.
Well, no, I think about Indigenous communities.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I just wanted to mention that because in hospitals we used Indian teepees as the public living rooms, because the hospital estates are so vast that some sofas with some fairy lights weren't getting noticed. So we put these beautiful magical teepees in hospitals. And some fairly woke people got in touch and were absolutely thought it was appalling that we were appropriating the Native American culture. And what was wonderful was actually someone who was a Native American got in touch and said how wonderful that actually we realized that they knew before we did how to bring people together. And they are so right. They were here first. And I just want to make it abundantly clear that Camarados is absolutely the least innovative thing ever. I really am sick of people phoning me up, calling me disruptive, and wanting to give me some sort of innovation award. I mean, if this kind of human connection is innovative, then we are all screwed, because this should be as old as the hills. Do you know, by the way, this thing about Maslow and Native
and the Blackfoot tribe?
Unbelievable! That blew my mind when I heard that. Because I've been angry at Maslow for most of my career, right? Because I thought his pyramid was upside down, right? Because all the people I worked with in the East End of London, they never got their food, shelter, and warmth sorted at all until they had some idea of self-actualization and sense and self-esteem, right? So you need relationships first. So Maslow's, bollocks. However, I then discover that 20 years later, he said, actually, I wanted to say it was about community because I spent time with the Blackfoot tribe, but that had no credibility in academic circles, so I didn't mention it.
There's something. You're going to have to, for our listeners, you're going to have to describe that a bit more about Maslow's hierarchy of need. Yeah, just because otherwise there'll be people who don't know about it who I think it's a really helpful story. So
sorry, I didn't mean to be all hoity-toity there. Maslow. What would you call Maslow? Is he like a social philosopher or something? I don't know.
Something like that, yeah.
Anyway, he came up with this idea in the 40s of a hierarchy of needs. So the most important thing to get sorted first is your food, shelter, and warmth. And then you progress down this pyramid until the last thing you need for a fulfilling and happy life is self-actualization, self-esteem, relationships, love, etc. And this has become absolutely learnt by rote by social studies students and pretty much anyone working in social justice and anything, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got to get them a roof over their head, you've got to get them food and all that. And it governs so much of how we behave with people, particularly in times of crisis. And I just think it's upside down because if you don't sort relationships out early on, people never hang on to their food, shelter, and warmth. I mean, when I was working in homelessness, 1 in 4 people were back on the street within 3 months. I saw it time and time again. I've resettled thousands of people over 20 years, trust me. And they all came back because they didn't have friends and purpose. So what's the point? So I just saw it in real time that Maslow didn't work. So it was amazing to hear him say, actually, the time he spent with the Blackfoot tribe taught him that actually it's about community.
And the other aspect of what you're saying, like social Darwinism, Herbert Spencer, survival of the fittest, and it's the same message that you get with Maslow's hierarchy of need. If you're poor, you can't be a valid human being. You can only have self-actualization if you're surrounded by comfort and wealth, and it's patently rubbish.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree that relationships have to come first, that sense of belonging. In fact, what you find around the world is that the people who have the least share the most.
That's right. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, you can look at any metric for giving, and it's the bottom 20% who give literally financially the most donations. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. Absolutely. It's really interesting. I used to work with a guy from the Sudan when I was at Crisis, and he said to me that the worst thing in Sudan is to be without your tribe. It's not to be homeless. And it's this whole notion that we don't particularly have that anymore in Western civilization, perhaps. Well, actually, I think we do. I remember going to a homeless conference and a Spanish guy stood up and he said, we don't really have a homelessness problem in Spain because if you get in trouble, you just go home to your mother. Things have happened economically in Spain to make that a different picture now. But I just thought it was interesting is actually all the people I met working on the streets of London for many years, that going home to mother was the last place they were going to go.
Exactly.
And so it's just a really interesting thing. We've lost that. So we have to sort of create this other sort of family. I mean, it's interesting. You said earlier that there were groups and people don't want to be part of a group. This is how we feel about Camarados in a way, is we're just trying to create a group where the commonality is life and how tough it can be. So there are fantastic groups for people with Alzheimer's, people with who like model planes, people who have alcoholism, prostate cancer, collect stamps, like Star Trek. That's all great. It's really great to have that shared experience. But I think it's also good to have another place if you just don't want any of that and you just want to sit and have a cup of tea and a custard cream and talk bollocks.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by the custard creams, mine.
Oh, I think we've found a Bourbon fan, have we? Yeah.
Bourbons, Jaffa cakes, custard creams. No, they don't do it for me.
Oh, dear. You're not allowed in.
Excellent. Right. We have covered an enormous amount of ground.
Is anybody going to be interested in this?
I tell you, there are loads of people who love it.
Really? Okay.
Well, if you think about it, like you're talking about learning life's hard lessons and making a difference by doing what counts. And it's a funny thing about compassionate communities or community development is when you talk about it particularly you talk about it in an institutional setting, most people go, of course it's like that. And if you talk about the biology, I've got into recently talking about the biology of it, particularly after, there's quite a few podcasts where we go into the biology of it. And what you're doing is you're combining intellectual knowledge with things that people feel in their heart, and they go, oh, of course it's like that. Of course. Why would I ever think it's not like that?
Yes.
So
Well, the most hilarious thing was I was invited to a meeting when a very large funder in this country decided that relationships was an interesting area to explore. And I was sitting there, and throughout the whole meeting, I was biting my tongue saying, don't be that guy who's been saying this for 20 years and now is bitter. just accept that everyone's got here and it's great, But then they said, right, let's go around the room. And the icebreaker question is, are relationships important? And I thought, how far do we have to have lost it if that is a question we think it's okay that we need to answer? It's like, isn't it obvious? Do we have to answer that? Do we have to measure that? Don't we know that now? I mean, how long have we been on the planet? And it's like, really? And I guess one of the things I struggle with this in the work is sort of is that thing you're saying, which is people know this already. So therefore, why do I have to kind of justify it? It's like we know it.
It's another whole argument, but one of the things that I question, in the context of these types of conversations is say, what does wealth mean? And it's not hard to come to a very quick understanding that wealth is contained in relationships and not in finance and finance and money and goods and power and all of that kind of stuff. And that's, to me, that's the big challenge, is how do you flip that on its head? Because all the people who are wealthy are really skilled at persuading everyone else that being wealthy is the route to happiness.
Yeah.
And what you end up with is, your man in charge of a large institution which has loads of money saying our relationship's important. It's like, man, have you even breathed? Have you actually thought about what you're doing and what you're saying?
Yeah. Just take 20 seconds and you realize kind of what a ridiculous question
absolutely.
that is.
Is there anything else that we should talk about and add?
There is one thing. Do you mind?
I'd love it. That's great. I've never had anyone say, yeah. So tell us.
Your podcast, I mean, I've blithered on long enough, and your daughter can mercilessly cut this. I hope she does. But your podcast is called Survival of the Kindest. And I've got a thing about kindness. So I had a bit of a rant last year about bad kindness. And it went mildly viral because I think it upset some people, but I think it chimed with others. And that is that kindness is, of course, the answer. It's, as I tell everybody, when my kids leave the door every morning, I say to them, be kind and be interested. Those are the two things I say to my kids every morning, right? So, of course, it is. But there's a hell of a lot of bad kindness out there. And I just don't think we can say kindness and be done with it. There is nuance to kindness. And that's because all the stuff we've been talking about has messed up kindness in a lot of ways. And there's a lot masquerading as kindness. And if you put a unicorn and a rainbow and a love heart beside it, then we're all fine. And let's infantilize it. And, oh, isn't that lovely? And people delivering charity and kindness, let's call them heroes. And then what we do is we exceptionalize kindness. People who go above and beyond, no, kindness should be just what we do. It should be normalized. And I just think there's a lot of very bad top-down binary kindness, and I saw it in homelessness. It's really difficult because a lot of people doing the bad kindness in soup kitchens and places like that, they're very nice people, and therefore no politician is ever going to put them out of business, which of course is what they must do. because what they're doing is they're keeping people oppressed. They're keeping them needy, and they're not meeting them mutually and asking them to get involved and asking what matters to them and getting them to contribute. They're just giving them a bowl of soup and saying, stay where you are. And then they're going home to their house in Isha, and all their friends are telling them how amazing they are for doing that soup kitchen thing. And that charity work you do, you're such an amazing person. And it's all about them and their ego. Meanwhile, the person is still out in the cold, and who gives a toss about them? So there's a lot of bad kindness out there, and I just want to out it with you.
So I would one of the we've started a series of 6 lectures for places that want to become compassionate cities or compassionate towns, and one of the lectures is they're more discussions rather than a lecture or workshops. One of the lectures is about power relationships and how power relationships invade everything. Unless you are aware of it, then you have power relationships which strip people of their identity and strip people of their interdependence.
Yeah.
You provide a service for somebody or doing something to somebody, you make community disappear. Angela was very eloquent on this, and so I guess that one of the things is with one of the problems with words is that words are not stripped of interdependence. They you have a word, but it permeates all kinds of other places, and I think that words are a kind of best fit tool, but they never describe actually what you're trying to get at. And I completely agree with you. Is that kindness, which is top down, is just another form of patronizing behavior which strips community. Kindness, which is can you listen in the first place?
Yeah.
Can you build relationship? Can you build value and meaning for people through relationship? Well, then you stand a chance of being kind just by respecting people.
That's it.
So I totally agree, but it's a subtle issue that has to be directly addressed, and I would say it's quite closely linked to structural inequality and structural racism.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of kind of common ground there, but that's a whole nother topic.
That's another couple of hours, but
yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that.
Not at all.
Okay, so I have 3 questions that I ask all my guests at the end of our talk, and the first one is, tell me about a moment when the smallest thing made the biggest difference.
Yeah. Well, I've already mentioned one, which was, when at a very difficult time in my life, those people sat down, had a cup of tea and looked out for me. And all they did was have a cup of tea in the shelters. And that really changed my life, I would say. But I'm thinking in our public living rooms, there's a very small thing you can do which can make a big difference, which is when someone says, we've run out of sugar, you say, better get some sugar then. Because we're all hardwired to expect there to be somebody who provides the sugar in this space because it's a service. So I encourage everyone to be bolshy and say, better get some sugar. That would be because then it shifts the power dynamic, and that person looks at you for about a second and then instantly totally gets it, smiles, and then goes and gets some sugar, and then everything's mutual and lovely. Yeah. So that's what I would say.
I guess that's what, when Cormac talks about gifts that people bring, that is absolutely a gift that you can bring.
Yeah,
for sure. The second question is, what's your favorite public moment of compassion?
I saw something on LinkedIn recently where there was a nurse who was caring for an old lady towards the end of her life. And this lady had sort of tubes coming out of her, and she was in bed. And this nurse asked the old lady to help her fold the ironing. And I'm getting a bit emotional thinking about it, actually. And this old woman who everyone had given up on was suddenly sat up in bed, and she's folding pillowcases and chatting away. And I thought that was absolutely lovely. And that's a great demonstration of that principle I was telling you about. Ask someone to give you a hand.
Great. Terrific. It's one of the things. This kind of links quite closely to the whole power relationship thing. And when you label people as patients and carers, you diminish both of them.
Yes.
It's why I like the First Nation, Native American idea of kinship or my relations, because every single person is of equal value,
Yeah.
irrespective of what they're going through in this life.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons why camarados is a word now used as a noun, because no one knows what it means. So therefore, you can call each other a camarado without it being patient, client, service user.
Yeah.
I'm just your camarado. Yeah, it's really important. You're completely right.
When I think camarados, it has a Spanish ring to it. I think that adds to the romanticism of it.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Yeah, I think a lot of people think we're a Mexican restaurant.
That's your next venture.
Yeah, I love a burrito.
The next thing is, what does the good life mean to you? What matters most to you?
The blues.
The blues.
Yeah,
Wow.
I would happily play the blues. I would play the piano all day and all night if I was allowed to. Music, bringing people together around good music.
The blues is another whole 2-hour conversation at least.
Oh, you're telling me, brother.
Oh, wow. I've said, yeah. Back in the day, those old blues masters were still alive, and I went to see loads of them,
Did you?
especially when I was living in London. Oh, God, yeah. Blues and jazz, seen some of the greats.
Oh, man. I'm sitting here itching to ask who.
Oh, B.B. King, Muddy Waters.
Oh, Muddy Waters. You saw Muddy Waters. Oh,
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah.
Wow. I saw BB. Yeah. I cried for most of it. But
yeah. No, he's fantastic.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. No, well, I that's my side hustle. I play jazz and blues piano.
Well, my daughter is going to be listening to this, so if she ever does get married, then you're obviously going to be there.
Hey, I can't wait. Yeah.
Well, Matt, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing more at future dates.
Julian, there's nothing better than being asked to talk about what I love and getting a booking out of it as well.
Excellent.
Cheers, mate.